Please keep in mind, these statistics cover all populations within the living environments, not just those confined. Through December 21st, 60% of our inmates are fully vaccinated. With intake and release inmates, this number is in constant fluctuation. 26% have received a booster shot, and we have successfully released more inmates in 2021 than the previous 5 years. None of these inmates were released as a result of COVID. These individuals were released because they were prepared to return to our communities. And also, I believe with the COVID pandemic, the courts have slowed down, but we have prepared in our House Bill 53 legislation is a contributing factor to that. But I just wanted to reemphasize, this clearly demonstrates our ability to meet our mission when we're faced with adversities. It's hard to explain why corrections matters as well as the cost. It's because 95% of those confined will be returned, and they will become our neighbors, remain our loved ones, and community members. Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Okay.
I'll proceed.
Ready to proceed on, please.
As a result of, our second item was our budget reductions. As a result of our budget reductions, we have restructured our central office. The central office saw a reduction in force in excess of 50%, leaving 28 individuals to support and operate this agency. The ability to respond timely to public information, records requests, records management, and contract oversight have been impacted. The central office has been restructured to address these challenges in an efficient and clear way. I have provided 4 documents for the committee today, and one of them is a copy of our new organizational chart. I have reorganized this department in a way that promotes teamwork across divisions, as well as provides a clear focus on our mission of central office, and that mission is clear: to serve those who are working throughout the state. Some examples include a CFO to manage all fiscal operations. Previously, the majority of the fiscal divisions and operations were overseen by wardens and administrators. We will have 1 training department for the agency, not 3. An inmate population monitor position will be created to help us realize greater efficiency and to manage our bed space. We've also reduced the number of at-will employees within our central office. As a result of reductions in probation and parole agents, we now realign locations of work based on our need and our objectives. This restructuring requires a greater focus on data-driven outcomes to ensure efficiencies. We didn't create 1 additional position, nor did we increase our budget. The third priority has been managing the impacts of the budget reductions. Mr. Chairman, as you are aware, last year, the Department of Corrections reduced its budget for over $21 million. I may report 10 years ago, our budget was set at $311 million, or it's $50 million of funding or appropriation more than we are requesting in this current budget. Did we remove too much funding? I believe it may be possible. And our budget is suffering because of the overtime at the penitentiary and this COVID pandemic. The cost of operations under a COVID pandemic were not understood or predictable when we accepted Tier 3 reductions. Though CARES and ARPA funding have assisted, it may not be sustainable in the long-term operation, more especially if this pandemic continues. It would be nearly impossible to remain within budget. And lastly, I want to touch on culture and 2021 correctional work environment. As you are aware, culture plays a role with staff retention as well as satisfaction. And there are greater emphases today on work environment as a result of this pandemic. I have taken this to heart and made changes that would be unheard of in the past, but I believe within our organization. As the director, my decisions must be driven by safety. Safety of our staff, communities, prisons, and offenders. As a largely uniform agency, we operate in an environment of structure. However, these changes brought about by the pandemic do not require us to look to some things differently. And I'll provide some examples. We have limited work from home opportunities because it's critically important for leadership and certain staff to be available in central office to troubleshoot and respond to issues that arise. I find myself contemplating things I may not have 2 years ago. As an example, we're currently allowing jeans to be worn twice a week, including with our correctional officers, as long as they're not provided into the public. I have approved telework within each division, and I'm currently evaluating those results. I have approved telework for other employees when faced with family and other personal emergencies. I'm currently considering a flexible work schedule. I'm working with A&I on that. And for the first time, I'm considering positions that were historically located in Cheyenne to be located elsewhere throughout their state, thereby giving all qualified state employees an opportunity to apply. I fully recognize employees today have a different expectation about employment. I continue to be open to new ideas. There are some additional things I would like to share with you. Over the past year, we have appointed the first female deputy director in our agency. We have appointed the first female warden at the Wyoming State Penitentiary in over 100 years. These individuals were not appointed because of gender. They were selected because they were the best applicants. Inmates are no longer housed out of state or in county jails unless they're waiting transfer to our agency. We've negotiated a medical contract without an increase in budget or reduction in services. We've implemented the Ohio risk assessment system. We got rid of the compass and reviewed casework compliance, which I believe is outstanding. Agents are now assigned to regions based on data rather than past practices. We've relocated our youthful offender treatment program, or YOTP, to the Wyoming State Penitentiary from our boot camp and WHCC. Female offenders will now have the opportunity of participating in YOTP at the Women's Center as we speak. We continue to provide hepatitis C treatment without any supplemental budget request. And we saw a new and improved agency realignment for the organizational chart. Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Any questions? All right, thank you. Continue.
Mr. Chairman, if there are no further questions, I'll walk you through the budget book with an emphasis on exception requests. Our budget book reflects a very conservative budget as a result of our Tier 3 cuts and is supported and approved by Governor Gordon's office. It has caused an exorbitant amount of work, but it's been completed to prepare the future and provide a true cost of operating the Department of Corrections. I will further discuss the transitioning from 11 appropriated divisions to 4 divisions. This recommended changes will eliminate the unnecessary complexities within our appropriate divisions. With your permission, we will review the budget request in numerical order. However, because of our consolidation efforts, and I'll get into depth and explain this if need be, the exception requests do not appear in priority order within the book. However, they are aligned and associated with the divisional allocation. As of this result, next year's presentation will be much more reviewer friendly. I will walk through the budget and will address these requests as they come up. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin on page 20 with the list of exception requests, as well as our priorities. I respectfully request to withdraw priority number 3, and that is our WCIS replacement. While the need for a new case management system is crucial, we recognize it's not feasible at this time. It was not supported by the governor's office, and we look forward to the continued work with ETS and maintain the system of operation. I would like to take a brief moment to thank ETS for the work they've done. During this past year, we've done a considerable amount of work. We've developed a business plan. We've created security reviews. We properly prepared for a future evaluation. Unlike in the past where we weren't really prepared, we're prepared to look in different options that are available. And I'll
Go ahead.
I'm just curious, essentially what we're doing is we're going to continue to operate with the existing system with the use of ETS, but what do you anticipate is the life expectancy of the system? So, I mean, we're going to have to replace it sooner or later. Kind of give us a good case, bad case scenario.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I'm certainly not an IT expert, but I can report that the life expectancy is passed already for our system.
Well, yeah, so is my phone, but I mean, realistically, if you have major breakdowns, I mean,
Right.
ETS keeps it up and running.
I did a number of things. We submitted through the budget. We also applied through our Drive, Strive, and Thrive through our ARPA, and that wasn't successful. So I'll be back next year with a plan that I hope that's lower in cost and more efficient.
Yeah, and that's the reason I asked the question, because it seems to me that in the next year or two, you'll be back with some type of request.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, working with the budget office, they also directed me towards the state of Idaho. And they have a very similar system to us in the past. And it wasn't a cookbook medicine, shall we say, but they cut their cost in half. And I spoke to the director up there several times. And that's really what I'm working for. So I'm prepared when I present it before you.
Okay, great.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Director Shannon, before you get into them, there's a couple of things regarding coming into your budget. I'm hoping you can help us with as we go into the, on page 11, as we look at the number of incarcerated individuals, it looks like that there's a pretty significant reduction, about 14% historically. Is that, just curious as to your thoughts on why that is? Is that COVID related, court delays? What are we seeing here that we?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I believe it's a number of all three that you mentioned. We have ramped up our reentry work to have our individuals ready. If you recall, last year, legislation provided a change in the way we figured and calculated our earn time. That helped. That released approximately 75 individuals right there. And number three would be our House Bill 53 is showing great improvements in moving on that. Regarding the courts, I don't believe we'll feel that effect for several years to come because it's so new.
No, that's good news. Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Then it looks like you kind of forewarn us here on page 14 that you're going to be requesting superflex authority. Mr. Chairman, that we've provided that. Have we provided that to them in the past, them and Department of Health, or is it just Department of Health? These two agencies.
Correct.
So this is just a continuation on of superflex authority that you have in this agency. I'm seeing two different signals here.
Mr. Chairman, I read the narrative there to no longer need the superflex authority as a result of the reorganization.
No longer need superflex authority.
Mr. Chairman, in fact, we have reviewed that, and we'd like to practice this new reorganization with fewer divisions for another biennium. So expect the governor's letter to adjust that comment, and then we would have superflex for both the Department of Health and the Department of Corrections, and there'll be two letters, each one of them addressing the different agency.
Okay. So
Could you put that in one line?
So in here, it said that you weren't going to, but we're going to see it to make sure I'm on the right page, but we're going to see a letter requesting that.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, just with a follow-up, the agency had a change of heart. Initially, I'm learning to be more fluent as I get older. Initially, it was my belief that going from 11 to 4 divisions will clearly lay it out to say this is what the cost of running Department of Corrections would be. And until we get through one cycle, I have in my comments that I would report back to you next year and ask that be removed as a superflex authority.
Thank you for that clarification.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
from the State Budget Department's perspective, one of the other things that we want to have under consideration is the fact that we're heavily using them for conversion of ARPA. So we'd like to keep that in place so that we can make sure that we get those dollars spent.
It's been a critical tool, Mr. Chairman, in the box to absorb all of these reductions and stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Continue.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, with the WCIS replacement request removed and also factoring into HR consolidation, our total exception request is reduced to $2,505,115 as I present to you today. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to proceed with the budget book walkthrough.
Okay.
To aid in our discussion, as I mentioned earlier, I've provided 4 handouts, a departmental organizational chart, a 6 and 900 series report as requested by the committee, a diagram of the reorganization of budget from 11 divisions to 4 divisions, and also on a supplement to page 20, which is a document that covers our exception request. I felt it was confusing, so I provided a numerical page number on the right side of the page to explain where that exception request is within your budget book. Mr. Chairman and committee, if it pleases you, if you can turn to page 27, it's the first exception request. It's titled the DOC Restructure. There is no cost. There is no cost for this exception. This reflects our proposal to consolidate our budget from 11 divisions to 4. And this will be identified throughout the book. It was quite an undertaking and task, very similar to the changes proposed by the Department of Family Services. This agency has chosen to incorporate these changes and have them completed within 1 year. And Representative Larson, that really was what kind of swayed me to think we may need Superflex after this complete change in 1 year. It'll also provide a fluent and transparent process for the next budget cycle. I want to thank the many individuals within the budget department as well as Legislative Service Office who assisted our agency with this overwhelming task. The new 4 proposed divisions will include 1,000 administration, 2,000 field services, 3,000 support services, and 4,000 prison division. This will allow our department the agility as we address the challenges of operating the 5 prisons as well as the 24 field offices specifically. It would reduce the need for B11s to transfer money internally. This will allow the department to efficiently meet the operation needs in the agency while provide a seamless correctional system financially. Expenses must be aligned and justified within their respective division. The inability to address needs as they arise is extremely expensive. This will be accomplished, and I may reassure this committee always comply with the state protocols. After completion of 1 biennium cycle of this budget, I will feel confident at that time I may appear before the committee and request elimination of the Superflex authority because all expenses will be incurred with the respective division and the expenditures of corrections will be available for all to scrutinize. This reorganization will require all divisions to work together for one solid mission and to demand a review of the possible future efficiencies. You will see this exception request throughout the budget book. It's been approved by both the Budget Department and Governor Gordon's office. As this may become redundant and in the interest of time, the committee, I can review it however directed. I can prepare to address the exception requests as they appear in the budget document to avoid a page-by-page review, or Mr. Chairman, I'll perform such review as you direct.
I don't particularly have any, I think if you want to, work to go division by division, or do you want, I mean, we've been doing unit by unit, but you've got so many units. That's a lot of units. And so how, I think if we can work chronologically through the budget book, I think that helps keep the most of us on track.
Okay, I'll do so.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it'll take me a little bit. Yes.
And so if you go on, for example, if you start with in the commissaries,
Right.
I mean, the commissaries are just standard budgets and you can zip through those and just say basically standard budget and see if anybody has any questions, but particularly in the commissaries, I don't think there's very much to talk about. So.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, committee members, if you turn to page, begin then on page 27. That was the restructuring as we spoke of. It was in unit 10103. Next, we'll go to commissaries. As we flip through the page, we'll begin. This is unit 0104, Women's Center Commissary. These are all standard budgets and requests. Wyoming Honor Farm Commissary.
And then this budget request, you're just all the commissaries just going to go from division. They're all going to division 1,000. So
Yes.
okay,
So, Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
I
Representative Larson.
do have one question in commissary division, if you could help me, and I think we can see it on page 43. Shannon. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I had my mic off. So it's on page 43 in the administration services here. It appears that we've got a standard, we've got a request for the 13,552 in benefits. Are they associated, are those benefits associated with that position there? That am I reading that right?
Yeah.
Are you talking about the 13,582 under a personnel on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yes, that is correct.
So that's attached to that. Okay. Wasn't sure if there was a salary attached to that or or not? There's not?
Mr. Chairman, this is the state budget department's modifications for the cafeteria plan selection for benefits.
Say that
This is
again,
the
please.
state budget department's modifications for the cafeteria plan selections for benefits.
Okay, so we see that, we'll see that in a couple of places. I think we'll see that on, and it reflects in it will reflect in the benefits. We'll see it maybe on page 48. And again, but that's what it's for.
So, Mr. Chairman, in chapter 17, that's where you'd normally see it, but they're moving from one place to the other. So they're moving those funds from divisions so that through their reorganization.
Okay, just,
Otherwise, it would just be the standard budget that you'd see here with no department request.
perfect. Just,
We have some comments from back there. Mr. Co-Chair.
Uncle Don?
Mr. Chairman, there's no salary associated with the position. So all that's left over is $13,000 for 2 years of all of the benefits. So, that's $6,500 per year for all benefits and no salary.
So that's what's confusing.
That's what's confusing to us.
So. Yeah.
And if you don't know, you can find out, and get back to us. We're just trying to, it just has a scratch in our head.
Kevin, you got a comment on
Mr. Chairman, we'll provide you the detail as the chairman suggested.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Mr. Chairman, committee, if we go next then to page 48. I'm sorry, 49. That'll be our assist account. This account provides an enterprise fund. We provide inmates with telephone services, electronics. These are standardized budget. It goes through WHCC, all our facilities at the Women's Center. And it goes on to page 79. Mr. Chairman, it's a standard budget with no, I stand for
Any
questions.
on communication assistance? All right, continue.
Okay. Next, we go into administrative service and operations. That will go to, I believe, page 88. What we're doing, you'll see a number of moves similar to page 87. What we're doing is we're realigning our funding, our positions, as well as to pull them into prison division. And if you turn to page 88, that's actually our first exception request. Mr. Chairman, committee members, this position that's listed there, what we're doing, it doesn't involve funding, but it involves the movement of a position. It was an AWAC position, 9502. It came out of our this may be a little confusing. It came out of education. At the time, when the House bill came about for House Bill 31, what we did was we utilized an AWAC position, which was provided through education, was federally funded, if that makes any sense. That funding will expire June 30th. I believe September 1st is their fiscal year. That funding will expire September 1st. However, we're asking to move the position, not the funding. I will address the funding at a later time. That would go from unit 1002 to unit 2014 general fund. This position, as I mentioned, was identified and implemented on House Bill 31, and it's responsible for the quality control and substance use disorder assessment, as well as treatment for part of this legislative act. The federal funding, as I mentioned, will expire this year, and funding for House Bill 31 will be addressed in exception request, and that is exception request number 5. Once again, this request is only to move the position. Funding for the request will appear later.
Mr. Coach?
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
So Director, my question is, Is it possible that there'll be federal action to refund this between now and September? If that's a possibility, we can put language in there that kind of lets you go both ways. That's my question.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I would welcome that. When we go to two other exception requests with the House bills, it's really going to require legislative initiative. I was hoping we could tie it in at that point,
Sure.
but if not, if we can still accept federal funding for it, absolutely, we would go that direction.
And while you're, I mean, I'm looking at the AWAC salary, unless this is part-time, that's just, I mean, that's not, where's the other 2/3 of this employee, probably?
Mr. Chairman, that is part-time.
Okay,
Our,
it is part-time.
We
All right.
received funding, then it was cut in half, then it was cut one more time, and that's what we have left. It is a
Okay, so
part-time
It's
position.
just an AWAC for basically a quarter-time person.
Correct, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, committee, this request, as you're aware, if you look on page 88, it was denied by Governor Gordon's office, as he recommends, and his office is recommending further funding for House Bill 31 to be a legislative initiative. This request will coincide with two other exception requests, one for House Bill 31 and one for House Bill 53 of similar nature, and will be discussed further as we move through the budget book. I would like to take this moment, and I'll highlight it later when we get to House Bill 31. We are up and running pretty strong as far as House Bill 31 and the initiative. The direction was given to the Department of Corrections. Department of Health will work together to make a seamless handoff, those in the community. And this position really works well, Mr. Chairman, even though part-time, and it's really providing us a lot. I can report there's a completion of MOUs between the Department of Corrections, the Department of Health, as well as many community mental health centers now. We ensure assessment information, as I mentioned, warm handoffs, and a timely entry into community treatment to release from prison is now completed. In the past, it was scattered somewhat, and it really affected the progress we made while they were incarcerated. Auditing of assessments, we assured they're completed. The department, with that funding, we purchased 4,000 online assessments. What the audit determined was there was a numerous amount of variations within assessments being provided in the community. So the Department of Corrections purchased 4,000 online assessments. Now we have one assessment tool that we can all work together. We can all interact and talk about what's the best interest of the offender.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
which instrument is it? Addiction Severity Index is the one I think that was okay. I've got a head nodding, I think. And that's the one the community mental health centers use and the judges want to see. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, I knew it was an ASI, but I couldn't remember the
Okay.
subpart of it.
And so, Mr. Chairman, just quickly, I want to say thank you for all that work. I mean, we've been hearing about this since I first started in the legislature on judiciary, and you and Stefan are making it happen. I mean, it's greatly appreciated, and it'd be a big advance for the entire state justice system. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, I often joke with Stefan that we're trying to sell cars to each other. He jokes with me about wearing a checkered suit, and but we're trying to better our departments, but we're working almost weekly on it. And a big shout out to the mental health centers, because they're doing their best in this pandemic, and they're coming around. So, thank you, sir. Lastly, we trained and provided clinicians throughout the state on these assessments. So I'll review that later, but I just wanted to touch base on that. I would ask the committee to support this request as recommended by Governor Gordon's office. Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Can you?
Okay, if we continue past 88, we're looking at the administrative services for education as well as programming. You can see what a huge undertask if you begin on page 93 out of unit 1023. How many changes will take place by getting it into the 3,000 system, and as well as the position numbers to move. This is throughout our agency. And you go on to page 97, the investigative unit, which is 1004. The investigative unit involves 4 lieutenants, a major. They work with our security threat groups. They provide exceptional work through all our parole offices. K-9 unit, it's a very very productive, and I hold with high integrity at that unit. We continue onto the book, onto unit 1004 is any with investigations. Back to Representative Walters with his salaries, administrative, if you go to 10111 on 102, that's the director's position there. And we'll keep moving forward. Inmate housing. I will speak of inmate housing later. We have, with the pandemic, we've taken it, I'm sorry, that's on page 107, it's unit 1012. Inmate housing, as I said, we brought our folks back, but we also are required to pay the county jails after 10 days. The utilization of our bed space during this pandemic, and it really has, not to be cliche, it's really been all over the map in the sense that first we're double housing, then we're allowed to single house, and then we do, because we do quarantines and isolations and everyone coming in, and most folks are not tested coming in. So we have to make the assumption that they have COVID. We can bring in, because of the required separation, we can bring in 24 a week, but there's been times where we had to shut it down completely, and we've had quite a bit of cost with that. Moving forward with inmate housing, we'll continue through recruitment. That's 1018 on page 111. And if you look at the bottom of 111, Mr. Chairman, that's where our priority number 12 will begin. And this request reflects a reduction of $2,557,386. And that comes from unit 1018. I want to report prior to June of 2020, Department of Corrections had 15 full-time and 1 AWAC human resource position. Since this consolidation, 4 positions were, as well as the budget tier cuts, 4 positions were lost and 1 during tier 1, and 2 positions were placed on hold with this realignment. As with any transition, there are bumps in the road, but I may report that A&I has been available to our agency. They're keeping the remaining positions in place. So it's the actual individuals that were there remaining, meaning that we have individuals in our institutions in our field, as well as those serving our support staffs. For example, we lost an HR manager at the Wyoming Honor Conservation Camp, but we were able to support it from another facility. We'd send individuals from Lusk or from WMCI, which is located in Torrington. Our recruiting is down, but that may very well be as a result of COVID, as this whole nation is suffering. I will continue to work with HRD to ensure their customers, which I consider to be the employees as well as our citizens, are getting the services they need. Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Thank you. Representative Walters, did you get your question answered? All right, thank you. Please continue.
You have me on my toes, Mr. Walters. Okay, if you go, if we continue on to our training academy, I would just like to take I don't have it in my notes, but I would like to touch base a little bit on our training academy. We had 3 separate, and we still do, but it's coming together as one, and I hopefully next year I'll be able to report out with some enthusiasm. We had a training academy for our correctional staff that goes up to 10 weeks, 5 weeks for non-uniform at Rollins. We also have a training academy that we utilize in Douglas. It's for our probation and parole agents. And for our programming staff within our institutions, we've had separate training that would be conducted on sites at different locations. We reduced the staffing. We brought under one division, we're bringing the training, and I placed it directly under the deputy director. And it is my hope, the way we're progressing, that we will have one training academy that'll service all our employees. So a number of things I'm aware that I have no interest in changing the location, but I keep that open as an option. What is the most pliable? What is the most cost efficient? I am aware of things that, our highway patrol, for cost, they moved to our community college here in Cheyenne. And so I'm looking at all options. So I'm anxious to report back next year, but we're well on the way of producing one. We have a lot of cross trainers. We're pulling, I'll get the examples that I would provide is, you know, through religious training, through legal training, we have folks scattered throughout the state. One thing that this pandemic, everything's not doom and gloom with the pandemic. One thing it has taught us, we have the capabilities now, not only with teaching our staff, but also teaching our inmates from one location. That's been really productive for us, and we'll be able to utilize these trainers. Now, certain things that are the required peace officer standards require actual physical interaction one-on-one. That obviously that can't be done, but our review of our training academy demonstrated approximately 80% of it can be done. If we continue on, we're on page 114. That's the training academy. Then we'll go the offender management, which will be on page 124.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director Shannon. If we could go back to the training academy and you had a lot of stuff going on in that section as you restructure stuff. But on page 118, where you come down in column 4 under the exception requests, it looked like there's an exception request for two individuals with a, you know, $357,000. But as I go back and look through that, I can't see the explanation.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, absolutely. Those two individuals were with our field services, with our probation and parole trainers. They're being transferred over to one unit to be under administration for training. Am I saying that correctly, Jeff?
Okay, and so is that, so walk me through how that works so that if we're moving them from point A to point B or just a different direction, does that require an exception request? And if so, should there be an explanation on what we're doing there?
Mr. Chairman, I got the same question. I think what we could do is get you an exception request for that to add to the book.
Okay.
That would help us.
Okay.
Okay, I understand what you're trying to do. We just need to, now I understand what you're trying to do.
We also have one individual that was in prison division would do the training. So we're bringing them under one appropriation
Okay,
as a training academy.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Larson. Go ahead, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, if you please turn to page 124. This is request number 10. It's out of unit 2011 and reflects our increase in telecommunication costs for a total of $287,391. These are billable costs to ETS for telecommunication expenses. ETS sets the rates based on the prior year, then works with the agency to project costs for next budget cycle. This recommendation has been approved by the governor's office and would request your support as well.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes, go ahead, Kevin.
On page 119, this relates to Representative Larson's question. You can see the D2 sheets that show the movement. This is going to be reflected in a few other areas with their reorganization. I think the simplest thing that we can do is just give you a flow chart that says A to B in a handout that will represent that. And then we'll just write that narrative that explains the reorganization aspect of that, points to that. I think that handout would be simpler than trying to resurrect a budget.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, please continue.
Thank you. If we move on, let's see, through page 125, the next one is split sentencing. That's unit 2013. Our split sentencing provides an opportunity. We just basically Department of Corrections funds it, but it does greatly reduce the cost of incarceration. It provides counties an opportunity to utilize sentencing through limited interaction with our county jails. And then if we go to page 134, this is exception request number
Mr. Chairman.
5.
Dawn has a question.
Who has a question? Don? Go ahead, Don.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for interjecting, but the State Budget Department does have a different table for page 126, which essentially moves one position and approximately $214,000, $225,000. We will bring that to your attention. Just, I think, as I understand it, it's just placed in the wrong unit. And you'll see a mirror increase on page 193.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I was just a little bit behind on that, and I appreciate Don pointing that out. We do have a handout that we provided to LSO on that, and Don is correct. We're moving position 1061 from the manager. It's a program manager from Unit 2011 to offender management. And it's $225,843, and that's just one position. The State Budget Department misread the intent of the department, so we're just going back to where it once was. So we're just undoing what the State Budget Department did, and we've got a handout provided to LSO, and Don is correct. It also has associated with the other unit in 1002 and unit 2011.
So does that change that FTE from 4 to 3 to 4?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it does. So one goes down and one goes up.
And are you just going to give us an errata table for that page? Is that is that how you proposed it? If I understood that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, what we have already provided to LSO are the adjustments to the tables
Okay.
for that move. And basically what it is it just takes it back to where it was before the State Budget Department misunderstood what the intent was when we built their budget. So it just takes the position back to where it once was with the funding that.
And then it'll show up in the exception request column. It'll just show up that way in the exception request column.
That's correct.
Okay. Does that solve your dilemma? Okay. Great. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, regarding that recent comment, I don't really know if it was a misunderstanding. Department of Corrections is responsible for that. When we submitted that to the budget office as well as LSO, I submitted the wrong tables. And now 3 days before we're here to present before you, the budget office as well as LSO caught that, and that's why we submitted new tables.
Mr. Chairman, I would just say all that they're doing in this budget, all the corrections they're doing in the budget, if that's all we have to worry about, it's a great day. I think you've done an incredible job.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You've done an incredible job. These are minuscule with what you've done in this budget this year.
And actually, it still is Kevin's fault.
I'll accept that, Mr. Co-Chairman, and move on. Committee members, if we please turn to page 134. This is an exception request on your sheet from page 20. It's request number 5, and it's from unit 2014. As mentioned previously, this involves House Bill 31, continuing funding for the Quality Control Unit in the amount of $324,380. As you are aware, House Bill 31, or HEA 62, was passed and approved during the fiscal year of 1920 session and is intended to improve substance abuse disorder treatment services in both the community as well as within our prisons. The department is working very closely with the Department of Health, Behavioral Health Division to implement this act. We're still in the process. It's quite an undertaking. As you also may notice on that document, the governor denied this exception request with the governor's office recognized the good work that's been done between the Department of Corrections and the Department of Health. But he's also recommended a legislative to consider restoring the funding through a legislative initiative. This funding request of $324,380 is for one full-time individual and other costs associated with the act that I previously mentioned, such as training, purchasing, assessments, and so on. As I mentioned earlier, I'm requesting your consideration to continue this initiative and to support as recommended by Governor Gordon's office. A little highlight of what I mentioned earlier, it was the completion of the MOUs that I spoke with responded to Senator Kinski between the Department of Health and our community mental health centers, auditing of assessments, as well as the purchase of online assessments. Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Go ahead. Is that Representative Walters or Representative Steph?
Walters.
Okay, Representative Walters, you can butt in. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm quite confused. I shouldn't say confused, but I don't fully recognize the governor's intent here. He thinks it's a great program, but because it was a legislative idea, he doesn't want to be the one funding it. So would he prefer the legislature repeal the law, repeal the initiative, and then leave it unfunded? To me, this is almost like he's trying to slap the legislature for doing good work instead of partnering with the legislature for doing good work. And so any thoughts, Director Shannon? I see Kevin's excited to tell us something informative.
Mr. Chairman, the governor does support the program, and it's a legislative initiative. And we would just like to have your assistance with how you'd like to put it into the budget. If you want to have this to be a standard budget item, that's all well and good with us. We just want to collaborate. So this is nothing about resistance. It's about making sure that we're collaborating with what you would like us to do.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, this initiative was a one-time funding. And now it can come out of the standard budget. It can come out of our budget because the funding will cease on June 30th of 22. So the Department of Corrections has to fund this, or I can move forward with the initiative. I can ask for an exception request under that if I'm directed to do so. If the governor's office directs.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If it's the will of the Joint Appropriations Committee to make a recommendation to have this included in the standard, it's that simple.
Yeah, I think what you're asking us here is, do we want to keep this going as an exception request, or do you want it to fold into the standard budget?
Correct.
That's-
So I jump in. Director, what we're thinking is, let's let this thing run for like 2 or 3 or 4 years before it's a standard budget. So you can tailor it, you can fix it, you can add, you can subtract, tell us if it's working. And that's easy. It's easier to take it away if it's one-time funding or biennial funding than to make it a line item for in perpetuity. So, man, Mr. Co-Chair, my suggestion is that we just fund it for 2 more years. Then you can come back and tell us if it's really working or not, because you're just really still standing it up and getting it rocking and rolling. Is that fair?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that's more than fair, as well as you'll see with 2 other requests we have with House Bill 53, and I'll provide some data that's really going strong for us right now.
So just to be clear, our motion will be to deny the governor's recommendation.
So, Mr. Chairman, and also that would be correct, and not the governor's recommendation, but give us guidance of how you'd want it to be handled, whether you want it one time again or standard. If you recall, when we did all the budget work for the budget reductions of $500 million, we were we did everything we could to see that there was a recommendation on how to handle that particular item. This is just making sure that we continue that process.
No, we got it. So all kidding aside, I think we've got that. And I think generally that's what we'll probably just make this as an exception request for another 2 years. And then we'll footnote that or something and say that, or we'll just make a note so that when we do this 2 years from now, that we'll note that we want that rolled into the standard budget. That makes sense?
That is helpful, because when we go through the process of building standard budgets, when we have those guidance, it's great. And like I said, when we did the $500 million reductions, we were very careful to make sure that we identified what our intent was, so you could accept, modify, or reject the governor's recommendation. And that helped us dramatically building the standard budget.
Fair enough. So, good. Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, my question was the same as Representative Walters, and I think I've heard the answer, which is the bottom line is we're in favor of the money itself. We're keeping it as an exception request to see how the program plays out. Is that the bottom line?
Right. Bottom line for 2 more years, and we'll see where we go. Yeah. Great.
Mr.
Continue
Chairman.
on, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we turn to our next would be page 139. This is priority exception request number 4. It comes from Unit 2015 and involves House Bill 53 and continuing funding for alternative sanctions. This amount of this request is $1,623,248. The purpose of this initiative was to divert, initially through a legislative act, felony probationers and parolees to alternative sanctions such as county jails, community correction centers, compared to a full revocation, of which they'll be sent to prison for substance abuse use or behavioral issues. The Department of Correction is seeing success in seeking continuing funding. Similar to what we spoke of earlier, I would just like to report a few things out, then I'll address what we spoke of earlier. We had 190 offenders in this past biennium were directed to one of these treatment sanctions. Now, normally, we base all data on 3-year outcomes. I only have 2, but I can report the following. As I mentioned, 190 offenders were diverted and went to treatment instead of, after being properly evaluated, went to treatment. 158 of those individuals successfully completed the treatment. Success rates for those who have completed the treatment so far within 2 years, and please keep in mind that we always use a 3-year standard, it's been 86% have been diverted from incarceration. To me, as we push further and we want to become efficient and more effective in our communities, alternative sanctions and sentencings really, it provides this agency an opportunity to do some remarkable things with our agents and our offenders. I'm asking for your support, Mr. Chairman and committee members, that we utilize this. I recognize the governor's recommendation, but we utilize this as a exception request for 2-year period to be reviewed at our next budget cycle. Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
And could you give us, so you said that 190 offenders were basically went through this deferral program. And what was the number you said that basically still messed up? Was it 26? Was that the number I heard?
Mr. Chairman, it would have been 32. 32 out of 190.
Okay, 32. Thank you. Okay, continue.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if we continue, the next is community substance abuse. That's for field services. That's out of unit 2016 on page 143, as well as our AAOA. Those are our assessors to perform all the assessments through the ASIs as far as for pre-sentences, as well as what type of treatment services. That's on unit 2020 on page 165. These are standard requests with no budget exceptions. The next is inmate medical. That's on page 150. And I would, at that time, I would go through, it'd be WHCC, which is our Wyoming Honor Conservation Camp in Newcastle, all the facilities. What we did was we renegotiated our medical contract. It is for $32 million. And it was the same price it's been for 10 years. And we did not have any reductions in services. And we were through an RFP. We had 8 competitors, extremely competitive. And even though the contract indicates that it'll be a 2-year contract with three additional 2-year extensions, I'm going to RFP it again next year. I'm really interested. I'm very satisfied with the service. However, I'm very interested in seeing how competitive we can become. As we continue through pages, I believe up to page 190, which completes the medical. Well, no, I'm sorry. It also includes, as we get to page 170, it's the outpatient services. It's tied in with our medical, as well as substance abuse. And that takes us to our next request on page 190. And that's our priority number 3. This is our WCIS that we spoke of, and Mr. Chairman, I'm going to withdraw that request. If we continue.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
So Director Shannon, as I looked at that, and I recognize that the governor denied it, but sometimes we deny the denial and fund it. But it looks as though this would be ongoing, 12 million ongoing. So was the intent of the proposal that 12 million was ongoing or one time?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it's a one-time.
One-time thing. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, there will be maintenance cost with that, but it's a one-time funding to get the system.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kevin.
the $10 million one time, but I believe the
Maintenance agreement.
is ongoing.
So you're going to find a slicker, cheaper version, right?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I'll Won't use the term slicker, but it's-
Well, Mr. Chairman,
we're trying to do it right, sir.
so Kevin, go with me to 193 there where it shows the 10 million, and even though he denies it, that's not shown as one time. Is it?
Go ahead, Kevin, say it again. I mean, excuse me.
So if you go to page 193 and we look in there under contract services 0901, and we got that, I'm assuming that's what that 10 million there in the total exception request is that's not shown as one time.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that should be 0903, and we do have it in I-bars as one time.
Okay.
So I guess I mean, if you go back to priority 3, I mean, I'm looking at 193 and then just going through what we just said with the exception request. So the denial results in a, oh, never mind. There's the other two. The other two's up in the main screens. Got it. Okay. I'm back on track. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Mr. Chairman, if we may continue on to page 200.
Oh, so before we go to 200, Mr. Chairman?
You okay, Representative Arnold?
Thank you. Could you, Director Shannon, could you go back to 191 with me?
Yes, sir.
And so we've got this HDR statewide consolidation. But down there on number 7, object code number 7 is the maintenance agreements. Why is that moved into HDR?
Mr. Chairman, that's an error.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Larson, I do have that in that memorandum that was supplied as a. Number 2, unit 1031, which is on page 191, in the amount of $1,848,831 is general fund in series 0292. It's maintenance agreements really associated with HR consolidation is the question I believe Mr. Larson was asking in my response. The narrative table for the exception request priority 12 includes both the amount of 0292 being transferred as well as a part of HR consolidation, as well as the $2 million in object 2092 from exception request priority number 3, which is why the total of 0292 request actually comes to 1.843. Does that help?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so to help on page 191, if you cross out the $1,848,831 and just change that to a negative 151,170, and then do the math for the total, that will equal the table, because the table is correct. If you look on page 193, you'll see that there was a $2 million reduction that we discussed earlier. And there was an ask for 1.8 million, and that's because of the 171,000. So the table's correct, but the narrative needs to be modified.
okay. Thank you for that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, as Budget Director indicated, I submitted the incorrect narrative. We submitted the right table, but not the narrative.
That means you're gonna have to be a director for 20 more years.
Now I'm concerned whether this is your problem, Daniel, or it's Kevin's. I don't know. I'm confused now.
It's Mr. Chairman, it'll become mine. Yes.
If he'd do his homework, he'd know it was the wrong time.
We're actually just kidding. This budget has been, it's obvious that there's been a ton of work, and we're incredibly appreciative of how this has been done, Kevin, and say that again. We've told Kevin that before, but it's just, we really appreciate the work that you've made our jobs a lot easier, at least in understanding the budget. What we do with it and how we work through all that is another question, but certainly the presentation and the organization is very commendable. So we do appreciate and recognize that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we continue on page
194, Mr. Chairman.
on to
Go
page
ahead.
194.
Go ahead, Lloyd.
So I just want to make sure that we've got our numbers right, because you go back in here and you bring in these 4 positions on page 189. then you consolidate HR, remove 3 positions. Should we not be showing a positive, a net gain of 1?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
that is the second portion of the conversation that we just had. So that is going to be corrected.
Okay, got it.
Mr. Chairman, if we go on to page 200, that's our secure treatment facility. It's located in Casper. We've altered that contract several times throughout the years, from a 100-bed capacity to 125. And approximately 3.5 to 4 years ago, we went to 150-bed, but with the tier 3 cuts, we lowered it down to 125. What I'm discovering is I'm really reviewing the best placement and the appropriate utilization of our bed space. I believe my conclusion will be in the future, as I report back to you, that we need to evaluate maybe expanding some of the program, the ACCs, which would be Gillette, Casper, and Cheyenne. We in the past year, more especially to the work of Administrator Sides staff, we've made those contracts performance-based. And that's really changed the way we're doing business now. And, but I just wanted to make the comment that things are working well with that. But I think that the interaction and more community-based is cheaper for us overall as a state. It'll eliminate a lot of need for future years. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you for listening, Mr. Chairman. That secure treatment will continue.
So just to, Mr. Coach, to follow up on that, if you're leaning in that direction, I mean, are you telepathing that possibility both for Gillette and Cheyenne, so they can kind of gear up and make it happen, and have them review those performance-based contracts, kind of things like that?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I'll give you the example. The ACC and Gillette is the leader right now in producing the performance and the outcomes that we, not only that we encourage, but we expect. There are individuals that are waiting to go, but they're at their contract limits and we're not able to send them.
Okay.
So with that in mind, as you're aware, I think I reported out last year how we really did a lot of moves on the way we're utilizing our bed space. And what that would do, my ultimate goal, which I'll get to it would be priority number 2. It's my last exception request, is to lower the population of WSP. So it's manageable in the sense that we have staffing to do so. So in the bigger picture, or the 20,000-foot view, we have individuals who could appropriately classified and ready to go to ACCs. We don't have the funding because of the cuts. So if those individuals were able to go at this time, that would free up other bed space, thereby reducing the population at our penitentiary. I hope that makes sense to you, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Kevin?
under the efficiency initiative, we actually did a study, and that study is almost ready for release. We're just following up with the agencies, Department of Health, Department of Family Services, their beds, and the Department of Corrections. And that consultant report should be delivered once the agencies have a final look at that. And inside that consultant report, you will see some nuggets, some areas where we could make some changes. And some of these changes are some of the things that Director Shannon is already talking about implementing.
All right, thank you. Look forward to it.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, return to page 208. That's the sex offender treatment. Things came to a halt last year, pretty much. And Department of Corrections opted out of the contract, and we went with Alt out of Utah, and they brought some folks in, and things are ramping up pretty well. But we did eliminate the past contract because we just weren't getting any services that were needed for our. Please keep in mind that it's over 20% of our population, so it certainly is a need. As we move forward,
Was that pretty much halted simply because of the inability to meet in person? Was that
Mr. Chairman, that was halted because of the inability to provide staffing.
staffing?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And conduct. We halted our treatment programs beginning approximately in June of 20, then reopened things up in October. But with the outbreaks of the virus, it changes almost daily. I mean, that's something that we address every day. But to answer your question, it was a result of not providing services because they didn't provide staffing.
All right, thank you.
On page 212, marketing administration, there's no change or request there. And that continues on to administrative and marketing. Let's see, we're on page 2. On page 224, it's up our adult community correction centers that we spoke of. I mentioned we have 3 we utilize. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a comment to the committee regarding the ACCs. I want to give a shout out to each one of them. Our tier 3 cuts required, they also lower their budget and working with us. And I did a number of things. At first, I made a mistake. What I said was Department of Corrections comes first. I was thinking of the agency instead of our state. So my initial meeting, I said, we have to reduce down to maybe from 90 beds down to 72, and the communities can have what's after that. And then what I did was I got some kickback and I realized what I was doing. I changed my ways and I said, well, we're going to go 2 for 1. But regardless, we're still at capacity that needs to grow, but in the event that I initially made a knee-jerk decision, and now decisions are made on behalf of our state and our communities.
What's the old saying? Sin in haste and repent in leisure or something like that. I forget it.
Yes, sir. Our vocational programs, that goes to each facility, beginning on page 232, the WMCI. Programming services on 1032. And our next page, I apologize for going back and forth. I had my notes written just a little bit different. Our offender management. If we continue, and we continue on, the offender supplies, that goes through to camp, WHCC, which is in Newcastle, that's on page 247. With the facility management as well as operations. But if you turn to page 251, this is priority 8. And this, I'll bring it out at once as far as, because it's all one subject, and then I'll discuss it as we flip through our pages. This priority is exception number 8, request that utility expense increase. This request on this page is specific to the Wyoming Honor and Conservation Camp, which is located in Newcastle. The request is for $320,113 and comes from unit 3022. You will find a similar request for the Wyoming Women's Center, Wyoming Honor Farm, and Wyoming State Penitentiary. Each of these facilities were expanded in 2007 and have not received a utility cost adjustment. The rates have continued to increase, and this department was able to pay for them by using additional expenses because of utilizing the Superflex authority, and we paid the bills out of the other accounts. Because of budget reductions last year and why the numbers seemed to increase, we had 2 options. They were taken, the money was, $1 million was taken out of operations. So I'd have to come with a little bit out of each pot, and instead of presenting 64 exception requests, I brought it in as 1. We were unable to cover these costs without this exception request. These projected costs were developed, and what we worked with the Public Service Commission, Jeffy Wiggins, Administrator Wiggins and her team. We worked for several months. And what we did was we provided, now my first comment on this exception request is for Newcastle. They utilize propane mostly for heating and cooling and such. But the other facilities, we negotiated contracts for multiple. And if all possible for this upcoming year, we're going to negotiate in most of our pro offices, at least, but we're going to negotiate one price for 24 offices. We just didn't project and say, well, this is what we think we're short. We worked with the commission in great detail to come up with this cost. Mr. Chairman, you'll see the same request, and I'll get to it as I go through, but it's on page 289. It's exception request number 6, which comes from unit 4022.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Sir.
Kevin.
I just wanted to discuss a little bit about the mechanics behind this exception request and how it relates to ARPA calculated. So basically what this would be is that you've seen throughout the budget that the standard budget is going to be going toward us recovering the portion of ARPA calculated to put it into revenue assistance. If the legislature approves this, they'd approve it in general funds first, and then we'd shift it to ARPA calculated. And that would allow us to transfer or convert more ARPA calculated dollars into revenue assistance. The mechanics doesn't work in IBARs. But if you understand that the legislature approves this in general funds first, then we make a recommendation to fund that with
Right,
ARPA. It would be similar
if you
to the
don't, you
standard
can't
budget.
supplant it. There's nothing to supplant. No, we get it. Or to replace the revenue on the revenue replacement, permissible revenue replacement. Supplanting is the wrong word, but you got it.
Did I use supplant?
No, I said supplant. I was the one that said that. No,
Go
no.
on.
You said transplant.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, because that's not what we're doing. It is just simply this. If you approve the general funds for this utility request, then at that point in time, we would use that to help us convert the portion of.
Well, and while you're on it, I mean, not only that, but then my guess is we may visit about this a year from now because utility costs, I don't know that that was what it was when you worked on it.
Mr.
Utility,
Chairman.
utility costs have not gone down and are not unlikely to do so.
And Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right. And that's why it ends with the comment and general funds for 25-26, because this is a standard budget that you'd be approving. We're just going to be using this as the ARPA revenue assistance function until then, but you're precisely right in that case.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Larson.
Thank you. Director Shannon, please. My apology for going in reverse. Could I ask you to go back to 276? I need to pay better attention. $276, yeah.
Yes, sir.
And so down there, on your last table, there's the narrative that says additionally, in order to properly align, you move the following 5 FTE positions to a new budget bill, but then there's listed below, there's only 2. Right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, could you repeat that again for me, sir?
So there's a table there that says position number and it has 1007 and 1042. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And then so there's 2 positions there, but if you look in the narrative just above it, it indicates that there should be 5.
That's what we changed to, isn't it? Right. The table's incorrect.
Unless I'm reading it wrong.
No. Did we address that on that? Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, you are correct. That narrative is incorrect. The table is correct.
So we could just correct the 5 to a 2.
That's correct.
Thank you.
I was checking to see if we corrected that in our memo. We did not. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, is that on 249?
276.
276.
276.
276.
Thank you. All right, continue.
Mr. Chairman, committee, I refer back to, we were talking about utilities. You'll see the same exception request on page 289. That exception request is from page 20 is exception request number 60 and comes from unit 4022. These are the utilities at the Wyoming Women's Center located in Lusk in the amount of $574,596. On page 318, the exception request number 7, which comes from unit 5022. These are the utilities at the Wyoming Honor Farm located in Riverton in the amount of $283,691. And lastly, on page 358.
So, Mr. Co-Chair,
Yep.
Director, these numbers that you use, are they estimates? And if so, do you have any inflationary dollars in them? In other words, is it going to be enough for, if you get a 5% rate increase between now and say next year, is this going to be enough?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, similar to what the chairman raised, these were based on August of 21 rates.
So the answer is no, they're
Oh,
gonna come back.
no.
We'll see this,
Locked in.
we'll see this again. In fact, my guess is you'll be moving money around to cover these before you.
So,
get back to
so
it.
my point is maybe we should allow an allowance for what we believe them to be. And that will facilitate not having to come back and rework this next year on the SWATs.
Mr. Chairman, the profile benefits from the current price of energy. We will talk Friday about the fact that we think that is is subject to volatility in a significant way. So with that understood, we're going to monitor this on both sides, the revenue side and also the expenditure side. And if this continues, that's a good thing for Wyoming. And then we would have a conversation about this, not only in this budget center, but other budget centers as far as the utility needs. As far as getting through this first fiscal period, we're in a good place, but you may see adjustments in the supplemental budget. And we don't want to drive every agency to the Joint Appropriations Committee just to adjust utilities. So what we would do is say, these are the utility areas, and we make that an ask rather than having conversations with each agency about
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I would also like to make one further comment to the co-chair's question. We got fixed rates for this winter. So we negotiated that for this year. So we're good till next winter. I utilize these same numbers to project for 23-24, but we're solid this year.
Other than the propane?
Pardon me?
Other than the propane?
That's a different story, sir. That's correct, Mr. Co-Chair. And lastly, on page 358, I know I'm jumping around, but I'm trying to bring these all into one as utilities, is the exception request. That's our request number 9, which comes from unit 6022 and involves the utilities at our Wyoming State Penitentiary located in Rawlins in the amount of $124,341. The total request for all utilities, and this goes back, as I said, from 2007, is $1,302,741. Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I take us back to the audit warrant section on page 340? I apologize to the public. If we could go back to page 338 to 339, the honor farm, the agriculture portion of that. Yet, if I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this, you're making a request for 1.488 million of, and the funding comes from that revenue source, but I'm seeing that revenue source is 700,000. Is that an annual revenue source of the 700,000?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that is correct.
So the 700, 1.4. So you're right in there. So, okay.
Yes, sir. And also during our budget cuts with tier 3, Mr. Representative Larson, we utilized those positions and put them in that ag account to save from general funding.
Yeah, I just tried to make the numbers add up to
Yes.
the 1.4
Yes, sir.
there. And
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Stiff.
Director Shannon, you mentioned the total request for utilities on exception was $1.3 million roughly. Is there a page that total appears on? I just didn't hear the page number where that is, or did you just do that calculation separate from all the individual requests?
Mr. Chairman, Representatives, yes, we don't have one narrative with a total.
Okay,
I try to simplify it for the committee.
thank you.
Instead of jumping around, we had 4. I might try to tie it into one, so you would understand the totality of the request.
Could have had 11.
Representative Larson. We're good. Mr. Chairman, committee, if we please turn to page 345, which is our final exception request. And this is our priority number 2. It involves WSP post-certified staff. We are asking for $1,579,536 allocation and a budget increase. And this will come from unit 6011. Mr. Chairman and committee, I would like to discuss how this request came about. This initiative was submitted prior to ANI's pay adjustment proposal, and as you're aware, the governor's office has denied this request. I certainly support the governor's vision to affect the enterprise of all state employees, but I still believe that I have the obligation to inform this committee of these challenges. This has been one of the most difficult requests that I feel obligated to support. This is troublesome because I'm specifically focused on one classification of employees at one facility. WSP, our Wyoming State Penitentiary, continues to be our greatest need. I want to spend some time discussing the wages for correctional officers and specifically the officers at this facility. You'll see that we're asking for an exception request in the amount of $1.5 million for WSP post-salary increase only. Second only to the non-cost exception request of our reorganization to salary adjustment is our highest priority for this department. As I sit and request a specific classification to receive an increase at this facility, I must emphasize I'm making this request out of obligation as I support all those who protect our community and public safety. Without our maintenance staff, programming, food service, parole staff, and educators, we'd revert back to a territorial organization. But Mr. Chairman and committee, staffing at WSP as well as the Wyoming Women's Center in Lusk has always been a struggle, more especially in the current environment. It's exasperated. Over time, WSP is running 4 times the budget amount, and we're sending 6 to 8 officers per day to the facility to cover every shift. Our overtime has exceeded $350,000 a month. These staggering numbers have been going on for years, but we've been paying for it out of Superflex authority. Correctional officers have been covering shifts at the Wyoming State Penitentiary since 2017. I have reviewed and may report for the past 17 years, we have struggled to fill our vacancies for security staffing at WSP. Last year, this agency had 165 vacant positions removed to include 14 filled positions that came out of central office. We currently have 109 vacancies within this department and 48 vacancies are at the Wyoming State Penitentiary.
Excuse me, Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Coach.
109 vacancies just in Rollins, is that right? Or total?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, we currently have 48 vacancies. Now, we removed a big bulk of those vacancies last year at our tier 3. And after that removal, we currently have 48 vacancies at WSP.
So Don, my recollection is that we in the past have allocated additional dollars, particularly for Rollins, some type of an incentive-based pays to keep folks there, and also to bring in folks from other institutions to work there because it was just tougher staffing. And Lusk was a little bit that way, but not quite like, not to the severity of Rollins. Is that fair? Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, that was accurate. It was in November of 2019.
And so what you're asking for is to essentially have these facilities staggered because it's a different place to live. You know, in essence, it's kind of like paying extra compensation for folks living in Jackson. In order to fully staff this place, you can, pay another buck an hour or whatever it is for these particular positions, and you recruit to it, so you're more likely to get people there and also more likely to keep them there. And this is the number you've come up with. And so, Kevin, how does this tailor into your compensation package? And have you guys thought about ways to accomplish this, either through the Superflex or some other mechanism? Or
Mr. Chairman, there is a uniqueness to the Department of Corrections budget, the fact that we do have a post-salary adjustment portion of money in their budget. 2 years ago, I believe, prior to COVID in 2019, the fall of 2019, we pretty well exhausted that. And we stemmed the retention at that point in time. So as this relates to the enterprise solution, we do have the calculations in this for the market-based portion, including the Department of Corrections. And in fact, in the last salary modification, the legislature approved a large share of that those dollars went to corrections to move them to market. So this is addressed somewhat in the enterprise solution. The overtime issue is there, and I can go all the way back to 2014 and remember having conversations about the overtime. That's how we're mitigating this, is through overtime. And in fact, more recently, we did shift some money from CARES to the general fund and then to corrections, $8 million for our anticipated impact for operating corrections. And now that's COVID related too, not just the overtime aspect of this. So the bottom line is that yes, the enterprise solution is there for this, and that's why their recommendation is to denial this at this time.
So, but following up on that point, I mean, I'm looking at the page in the booklet on the enterprise solution, and I'm kind of scratching my head. I mean, been in and out of appropriations for quite a few years, and before, you know, there were so many vacancy savings that there was always plenty of money to pay the overtime, and that's not the case anymore, because there's so many positions have now been eliminated. But when I come in this, and it's got me scratching my head. So on page 132, I look in the annual impact of proposal, just the estimated cost with benefits to move to the new minimum is only $40,000 agency wide. And it's $39,780. And then the overall estimated cost to move to benefit with matrix, which I get that one, is just under $3 million. But I'm scratching my head about why just to move to the minimum is so low, when, I mean, this has been a problem. So I remember my mother in the legislature talking about, when she was in the legislature, talking about correctional officers not making enough money and having to be on food stamps in order to save it, to feed their families. And so I'm struggling to kind of, a lot of them I kind of get. This one I'm struggling to match, Kevin.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Anna. So help us understand a little bit better.
So Mr. Chairman, the first statistic is the minimum. Our recommendation is to go to the market position, which is the 3 million. So in this request, you have a $1.5 million request offered by the Department of Corrections. In the performance package, compensation package that we have, it's allocating $3 million.
And so in that package, is there going to be the flexibility within the Department of Corrections to do exactly what Dan's talking about, which is, the correctional officer in Lusk and Rollins may have a different level of pay than the same level of correctional officer in one of the other facilities.
Mr. Chairman, I have to believe that that's under consideration from the differential, like your co-chairman said, from Jackson to Rollins to Lusk. Those things need to be under consideration. I would believe that they are.
Oh, but the issue with Jackson, and so I'm just trying to make sure that we're trying to address, and if we're addressing the problem, great, because that's what we need to do. But I mean, the issue with Jackson was cost of living. That's not necessarily this is a different issue. It's not necessarily the cost of living in Rollins or Lusk. It's the attractiveness of living in Rollins or Lusk compared to other places, including people to those two communities in particular.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I agree with you that Rollins has a employee shortage and a constitutional provision that facility remains there. Those are challenges that are in addition to what we have here, but the market analysis that is performed should be looking and taking into consideration these issues.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may comment. The co-chairman spoke of in 2019 at the Wyoming Women's Center in Luskin and at the penitentiary, we increased the value of the starting wage $1. So we have 3 facilities at 1 starting wage, 2 facilities at a higher rate. When you're looking at the proposed $3 million, what that will do is raise the starting costs for 3 facilities. And as I proceed through here, I'll explain it to you. That starting cost will be below what we're currently paying WSP. So that's why the number is so minimal.
Let
that you
me
spoke of.
let me pare back what I think I heard you say.
Okay.
And that is that with this adjustment, that the starting wage at several of your facilities will be, even after the adjustment, will be lower than what you're currently paying at WSP and Raw.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct, and I'll explain that as we
I
go
did hear
through.
that right. Okay.
So let me, before you go on, Director, my understanding of what Kevin just said is if you choose to, you have the ability to again increase the starting wage with this pay increase, the 3 point some odd million
That's correct.
in all facilities.
Correct.
I mean, you can do that. In other words, if you go up 25 bucks, 25 cents an hour in Riverton, you can go up 50 cents an hour in Rollins because it gives you that flexibility. Is that fair, Kevin?
Mr. Chairman, these are good questions, I believe. Director Bach will be here on callback. These are good questions for the HR professionals. That's the first observation. And I think that, Mr. Chairman, the employee pool in Rollins is an additional challenge that we have. And most likely that was probably what motivated us to get to the post-salary adjustments in the past that we added to their budget. That post-salary adjustment was provided to the Director of Corrections to use. Now, naturally, in the fall of 2019, the State Budget Department, HR, and Corrections met, and we allocated that post-salary adjustment together. We had the conversation together. And I think that's where the differential lies is how do you overcome the fact that you don't have the employee base? And we do understand that the overtime, particularly in Rollins, is historically, this isn't news to anybody, that the overtime is it's deafening to the amount of money that we need to, and I would say to retain employees.
So, I mean, so it gets down to the point so I think I'm hearing, so I mean, the real question is when you get down and this $3 million, if the enterprise-wide pay solution is implemented, and now there's this additional $3 million, from our discussion today, I'm thinking that there's enough to do what you think you need to do because $3.3 million is more than 1.5 million, which is what you're asking for.
Right.
So I'm thinking that there's enough to do what it is you want to do. And so I'm just trying to make sure that we're still talking apples and apples when we get with the enterprise solution, that there's still the opportunity within the department. It may not, and this may not be the only one because generally the idea is we kind of want people doing the same job, getting the same pay. So we're not moving from one department to another just so they get another 50 cents or $1 an hour. But when we get in certain departments, like the Department of Corrections, Department of Transportation, and others, those are, it's state, it's multiple locations, and some of those have more difficult recruiting pools, Rollins being one, Rust being another, than some other places. And so I'm trying to get a warm, fuzzy feeling that this $3 million is enough to address this issue. And then is there going to be flexibility within the plan so that Director Shannon can get done what he needs to do to fill those positions?
Mr. Chairman, that would be a good question for Director Bach as far as what the flexibility with the Department of Corrections, with the understanding of those challenges would be. And then remember, we didn't go grandiose in this whole plan. I mean, for the enterprise, it's trying to move forward. And it certainly doesn't get us to the 2021 market solution.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, what I'm thinking is it would be nice if you would get together with Director Bach and address this before you, so we don't have to spend a half an hour going through it tomorrow or whenever. If there's a solution, great. If not, then we'll tell us what we need to do to help make a solution happen. And hopefully she or someone on her staff is listening and we can address it or have it taken care of. Does that help you?
Yeah, and I'll go into greater detail, Mr. Co-Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, the $3 million from from my understanding, will bring up the other facilities up to market, up to
2020.
2020 rates. It will not do that at WSP. And to the co-chairman's question, an agency director has the authority, if you have the funding, to move up to MPP, which is 2,200 of new market rates that the ANI is proposing, and I'll discuss that. I wouldn't have the funding. I certainly have the authority, and it goes to Representative Larson's when I said I had to change the superflex. That's one of the things that caught my eye. And I said, wait, I'm going to need this through this next budget year to be able to do this, because it won't allow me, I won't have the funding to address WSP. I could address the other 4 facilities, but not WSP because of the increase in 2019. If I could just have maybe 10 minutes, I hope I could answer a
So
few.
what you're saying is that you want to bring the other 3 up, but you need to add another 1.6 to move.
WSP officers to market pay.
And then
Yeah,
the
you
differential will be about the same as it is now between WSP and the other
No, the differential would be
greater.
very much greater, yes. And I'll give examples of other local municipalities and how it compares, things of that nature, without going over.
So I mean, so just out of curiosity, just as an example, so just, you know, a correctional officer with, you know, 3 to 5 years experience, in Rollins, WSP compared to the Honor Farm or Torrington. What would be the pay difference?
The pay differential, Mr. Chairman, would be 1796 for Riverton and 1906 in Rollins.
In Rollins. And that's what it would be, that's what it is now, or is that where it would be if you got what you wanted?
That's what it would, no, that's what it currently is.
Okay, and if you got what you wanted, what kind of differential what do you see that be?
The pay in Rollins would be 2222.
And compared to 17.99 or
Yes.
basically $18.
Yes, 1799.
All right, thanks. Well, before I do that, Representative Stith has been waiting so patiently.
No, Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to beat this to death, but I guess what we'll need to understand is how this 1.579 million plays into the $3 million ANI recommendation for
doesn't.
pay increases.
It's in addition.
It's completely separate.
Yeah, it's a different
Okay.
deal.
That's an answer. Thank you.
And for
No, wait a second, it's Representative Walters' turn now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions related to this that are somewhat different. The first is in 2019, we offered this post-certification pay increase. Was that enough to help you both recruit new officers to Rollins? And was it enough to help you retain the officers you had, stem the tide of loss, you might say? Or did it need to be even a greater increase to help? That's the first question. Once answered, I would have another one, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, thank you for the question. Anecdotally, what I recall is it helped until May of 20. It helped retain the staff that we had. And I have documents on 2021, we lost 34 off. Now 3 retired. We lost 34 officers at WSP through 2021. So to answer your question, no, it did not retain. And for the committee's information, I submitted this supplement request prior to ANI and HRD submitting their benefit package. So I went out on a limb with this, which to me, I felt a necessity to do so. So now that it's in the budget book, I have to address it. That's why I'm here today. I don't know if that helps it. I didn't do it in conjunction with Director Block we worked together on it, but I did it beforehand. So now
So part of the problem we have is that after May of 2020, just about every place in the United States lost 15, 10, 20% of their
Right.
workforce. And so it's hard to know what the real
Well.
impacts would be. But what we do know is that if you raise the rates at the other 3 facilities, that's going to put pressure back on Rollins.
And not only that, it puts the pressure on the amount of security staff that we have for our inmates. And I'd like, once I answer, Mr. Co-Chair, once I answer Representative Walter's second question, I'll go into it and talk about a population that we have to get down to. I went back 14 years on it. So I went through the pandemic and different things to say, when did we have the staff that we can comfortably, what we can house at WSP?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This next thing really is how to help you solve this. And I think Director Hibbard brings this up. The labor market in Rollins and in Lusk are both very tough and unique, to say the least. Would it be beneficial if we put money in your budget that would allow you to offer temporary housing so that you could, for example, bus a group of workers from Cheyenne to Rollins, house them? They'd work 3 on, 4 off, 4 on, 3 on, off, kind of a shift work situation, coming from other locations, other communities, not your staff from other locations, but absolute new employees that don't live in those markets. That would, because I guess I see this labor market is, we can't pay enough for a family wage. And so if the other half of the wage earners in the household cannot find employment in Lusk or in Rollins, then they don't go to those locations. And they might find employment in the Front Range or in Cheyenne or something and be willing to do a shift work type of work. But your budget really doesn't allow for that sort of a outside of the box, crazy way of thinking. Is that something you would consider requesting as we try to solve this problem? Because you still have the same number of inmates there, regardless of the number of staff to keep an eye on the hen house. So that, my question is, have you thought of that? Is that even a workable solution if the money were available?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, I think we're beating to the same drum. Last year, we reclassified positions to make them 410 positions. And we actually posted it, then we hired staff that are living in Cheyenne. We trained them, they remained there, and then right down together to WSP. So we do have positions that people can live in Cheyenne and be bused to Rollins.
Following that up, Mr. Chairman, would it help if we increased your budget to enhance that type of an opportunity, knowing that there's extra expenses with doing that, not necessarily just wages, but other, like the busing, the housing, unless you put them in the cells with the inmates, they have to stay somewhere.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, in all honesty, I have to say I'm not sure, because we've had minimal success. Several of them have moved on. We were the training grounds. Several went to county sheriffs, and I'll talk about that. Two of them, two individuals I can think of went to the service. If we had great success with it, I would say absolutely, and I appreciate the support on that, but I don't want to be throwing good money after bad either.
Now, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as we go back and reflect on that 1.5 million that you requested, which would have helped with the needed differential there, you note in your narrative that you used 2.7 out of ARP funds to accomplish that, but you only requested 1.5, and I'm just curious why you requested 1.5 instead of 2.7.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, because I got ahead of myself, what I did was I did an analysis and I looked at what the other county detention centers were playing. I looked at Goshen, Niobrara, Rollins, Sweetwater, Lincoln's a little bit higher, but I looked at what they were doing and we were $3 an hour below them. So what I made a proposal and it was for a $3 an hour adjustment. But what that did was violate the policy because that was above MPP. And I never thought of that until I sat down with Director Bach. So I had to revert and pull that back to make sure I was within state policy.
I see. Thank you.
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm trying to follow all this. There's a lot of threads, but I'm curious whether you think the issue is primarily what you're paying, what the competitive jobs are in the area, and what housing availability is in the areas and how they intersect.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, thank you for asking that. Actually, we'll start with the housing. The housing market as per diem cost is actually higher, I think, believe in less in Niobrara for our women's center. Housing is certainly high, for Rollins, but if you look around, and I'll provide a little bit of testimony, when you go visit the local detention centers, many of those individuals were working at WSP and now still remaining in the community. So I don't really know the impact if housing would have that effect. WSP like it would in Niobrara County. I hope that helps you.
Sure.
So, because I recall a couple, it might have been when we visited Rollins, whenever that was. And the conversation at that time was there actually wasn't a there was a housing shortage on top that complicated the cost. And then the other piece, are you aware, I mean, what is McDonald's paying Rollins, for instance? And you probably don't know, but I'm trying to get a sense of what your pay is relative to other jobs in the area.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, if I can go through, I hope I can answer some of that in my, and then I'll come back. Yeah, I do have some information on what people are paying. Mr. Chairman, may I?
Sure, go
proceed?
ahead.
I probably need, this will be my most detailed exception request. I probably need maybe 5 to 10 minutes at most. Proceed with it.
We take a break and then
Yeah, okay, why don't we, let's stretch our legs. We're gonna stretch our legs for a second so we can pay rapt attention to the. We're gonna take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and take that up.
I thought you were joking.
Thank you.
I got the turn on. It was nice.
All right, Director Shannon, where were we?
10 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinsky, I'm going to wrap this up in 10 minutes.
Go ahead.
Speak fast. I would like to say, once again, where I left off, we currently have 109 vacancies within our department, of which 48 vacancies are at Wyoming State Penitentiary. We can call what we may choose, such as overcrowding, construction, whatever we may. The bottom line is we've housed inmates in Colorado, Texas, and Mississippi. The wages have never allowed this department to hire the required amount of positions necessary to efficiently and remain safe and appropriate with just overtime. I've been asked often regarding this situation, has it become a safety factor? I may report, even with all these challenges, our staff have maintained a safe operations and we met the requirements. We have been locked down numerous times throughout our agency with regarding COVID and working our way through that. But all our staff go above and beyond, and they and their family are now exhausted. As you're well aware, WSP is our maximum security prison. And as I discussed last year, correctional officers are post-certified frontline responders. Every day they face potential threats for not only their safety, but for safety of the facility, inmates, staff, and ultimately the community. Our posted starting salary for correctional officers is $17.96 an hour at our Torrington facility, our Honor Farm in Riverton, and at Newcastle. It is $19.06 an hour at the Wyoming State Penitentiary, as well as the Women's Center in Lusk. A review will show that these starting rates are below many county jails within our state. The current A&I proposal, the $3 million that our chairman was discussing for correctional officers, will bring the new minimum to $17.78 an hour, which is actually below what we're paying. And the MPP will be $22.22. So where the 1.5 comes about is that would allow me to take the rate that I would be authorized as a director to take it up to MPP. This exception request would authorize me to pay MPP, as I said, for security classifications only.
So when you say that you take it to MPP, how do you make that determination of what MPP is in WSP and Rollins?
The MPP is set through A&I by work classification for all individuals at the same classification.
Right, but I mean, therein lies like, how do you ever get around that problem in that the MPP to get someone to go, I mean, I won't use the word MPP. The salary or the hourly wage that it takes to attract someone to the WSP and Rollins is, in your experience, significantly different than it is in one of the other facilities. So how do you establish MPP for WSP and Rollins?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, I'm not able to change the MPP, but I would have an opportunity to sit down with Director Bach and Administrator Williams and ask for an exception to go above MPP.
Okay.
That's our state policy.
And so that exception opportunity exists.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
yes, it does.
And so, and you've yet to have those discussions with Director Bach or
Yes.
they're ongoing?
No, I had the discussion with Director Bach as well as Administrator Williams, and they were very open-minded to it. But I held back until I came before this committee because of the submittal. As I mentioned earlier, I submit the request before they submitted their plan. And once they submitted their plan, I held mine back. So yes, I did have the conversation with the Director Bach and Administrator Williams, and they were open-minded. And depending on the outcome here, I'll approach them.
And we understand that. You never want to get out in front of your boss. So we get that. I mean,
This, what I'm speaking of now, goes against the recommendation, but I'm doing what I believe is right. So,
okay.
if I may, sir.
Yeah, continue, please.
This exception request would authorize me to pay as MTP, as I said. The proposed pay scale hiring rate is lower than we're currently paying because we were authorized in the adjustment in October 19. While I'm appreciative of any efforts to ensure staff are paid appropriately, it does not fully address our staffing and hiring issues specifically to correctional officers. I'd like to discuss our correctional applications of recent. We received 262 applications during 2021 compared to 623 in 20. And that goes back to our co-chairman's talk about 20% reduction.
Can you give us those numbers again?
Yes, sir. 262 applications in 2021 compared to 623, which is 57% less than the year before.
In 2020.
Correct.
Okay.
We had 34 new correctional officer hires in 2021 compared to 85 in 2020, which is 60%. Most certainly. I'll
Yeah,
submit
and,
that to the committee.
and again, and then the other, obviously, the other thing that always affects everything is, this is smack in the middle of COVID, and it's just, the world's different now than it was a couple of years ago, but yeah.
We do have that information, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
and I'll
okay.
provide it to the committee. I recognize there are numerous factors with the retention of employees, and it's up to the agency administration to work the hardest to retain. And I'm not qualified, at least I don't believe I am, to analyze market payer benefits, but I would like to present some realities. The state of Nebraska is currently offering a higher rate of $28 an hour and a $15,000 signing bonus. The state of South Dakota has increased its bonus $4,000. I'm not a supporter of bonuses, as I believe it's a short-term effect. I can tell you we lost 4 staff in the last month to these states. We also lost staff in December to Fremont County Jail as well as Riverton Police Department. A review of the current detention employees at the Goshen and Niobrara County Jail will reveal many of those former individuals are former DOC employees from Lusk and Rollins. Carbon County is currently advertising detention rate at $22.76 an hour. They're being paid a higher wage and they have less inmate difficulties during their work as a result of post. There's no effect in their retirement or their benefits. It transfers over right from the state. Based on the current staffing levels, we are limiting our ability to fully utilize our bed space and capacity at WSP. I've worked diligently to reduce the number of inmates from approximately 720 down to a number more in line with current staffing levels. I'm targeting a population of 405 inmates. I believe that's what we can comfortably hold at WSP and staff. I'm also reviewing other housing options, as I mentioned earlier.
And then, so that's with the level of staff that you have now, you just said that you think your population cap is 405.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct with the current population.
All right, just making
staff.
sure I heard that right. All right.
There are 3 additional solutions that I would like to raise. First, if we raise the wages, it's my hope it'll assist in recruitment, more especially the retention of staff that we have at our penitentiary. In addition, establishing a sustainable plan that addresses recruitment and wages for all correctional employees would be the best long-term solution. Second, we could expand the capacity in housing unit A, that's at WMCI in Torrington. Although I need to point out this would take several years to complete. And for the first time, we're actually seeing challenges hiring staff in the Torrington area. Historically, this has not been the issue. Or third, we manage existing staffing capacity by transferring inmates to another location or way of relocating WDOC inmate population. Mr. Chairman, committee, without approval of this exception request, I may have to revert to one of the other options. I work with it daily. And I would have to come back with a supplemental request. In summary, I spent most of my testimony here recently talking about the correctional officers at WSP. I'm here to advocate for all staff within our agency. Each position is necessary to order us to keep our mission. Food service staff, caseworkers, our maintenance staff, which is often difficult, they work beside inmates every day to maintain the safety. Educators, as well as our AOA assessors, are diligently working to provide appropriate treatment plans. Probation and parole agents are working in people's homes all hours, day and night, risking their safety to perform their duties. Historically, we only lost agents, very rare, mostly to federal positions. Now we're losing to multiple identities. The department's correction, it's my belief, is about as lean as we can while trying to meet our mission and be productive, return productive inmates back to our society. I'm asking for your support and assist in this matter. I went back and I looked at the representatives, I think it was Representative Schwartz's question. At first I took analysis, the private sector, and back to the co-chairman's comment about we're so off. And I agree, it's difficult. It's difficult even to try to determine future staffing analysis and things with inmates because of COVID. But that being said, at first I looked at the private sector and I got away from that. But things that I did take place to ask, I think it was Representative Stiff that asked about housing. I looked at Union Pacific, I spoke with the superintendent of schools and I was able to get information regarding the housing and individuals that work at the school district in Lusk as well as Rollins, and excluding some issues with applicants, most of those are filled. Then I went, as we through attrition, we were losing folks. I start looking around at what local municipalities, and as I mentioned earlier, they can transfer with their retirement. As I mentioned, Carbon County, this is as of last week, they're advertising a starting wage of $22.76 an hour. That's for Carbon County. Correctional officer. County jail, sir. Sweetwater County is between 22 and 25, depending on experience. Kemmer, 24.71. City Market in Rollins, I think that was Representative Schwartz, are advertising $21 an hour. Work at City Market. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the patience and the willingness of the committee to listen to this matter, and I stand for questions.
Okay, thank you. Do you have more questions for Representative Stith?
Mr. Chairman, just for kind of an overarching question, if we're explaining to our colleagues what this restructuring is of your whole department and why it's a good idea, is one of the purposes that you, in the past, when you had, say, the women's facility and the men's facility in different divisions, that if you wanted to transfer money from one to the other, you'd need to go through the B11 process and submit a request. But if you have it in the same division, you won't need to do that. Is that a fair statement, or have I misunderstood one of the
Mr.
purposes
Chairman,
of it?
Representative Stiff, that is correct.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So that means
Sure, go ahead.
if you decide that the food budget is too much at the men's facility and you wanted to make sure that the women's facility had Chateaubriand and mango chutney, you could do that without having a B11.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, though I wouldn't, that is correct. I'll give you a few examples. If you have an individual, say from Riverton, and he becomes ill, he's transferred to Salt Lake, he's life flighted. We'll send staff maybe from our Torrington facility. So the hospital bill then is going to Torrington. Our overtime is being billed out of Torrington. These nothing to do with the division, nothing to do with the actual appropriation for the Wyoming Monitor. That's how construed it was. And hopefully I can get that lined out so I can come before you and say, these are the actual costs. And we know where our expenditures are.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, we have no limits. No, sir. We have, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co. Yeah, but one.
Oh, you forgot about that one.
I didn't think we were paying for it. We have an individual, we had an agreement, and that's been for probably 20 years now in the federal prison. We have an individual that's being paid for. If I could, sir, we have no individuals contractually housed out. We have no inmates housed in county jails. What we do have are individuals, what I think, Mr. Co-Chair, what I responded to was, we have individuals that are in county jails waiting to come into our system. I believe if Mr. Wilson, about 85, 90. Yeah, it's around, it fluctuates every week. We have about 90 individuals waiting to come into our system. They're in county jails that we're paying for. They're already sentenced and we're paying after 10 days.
And you're paying up to 10. Are you paying up there? You're not taking them? Is it just waiting period, or is it because you're at these capacity limits for staffing that you're not bringing them on, or both?
No, Mr. Chairman, it's not because we're at capacity, because as I said, we're not at capacity within our department. It fluctuates every week, and I'll give you an example. Last week, I think we brought 47 in. We were over 1/3. We brought 47 individuals in. We can handle about 48 at a maximum at our reception center in Torrington. Now, depending on the COVID, we check every week on Monday. By Wednesday, that changes. If we have an outbreak, many individuals that are coming in are already positive. So it fluctuates every week. I mean, probably maybe a month ago, we had no one out in county jails. 6 weeks later, we have over 100 in county jails waiting to come in. We pay, after 10 days, we pay the rate.
Yeah. I remember as a county commissioner, we looked at it as a profit center. Anyway, yeah. Comorbidity.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, we are not at this time addressing it differently. We meet every week. Last week, Mr. Wilson and I, we met with the medical director who also met with the state epidemiologist. And with the CDC recommendation, we could go down and those changed. But they also have recommendations for detention centers, and that's different than the public. And at this time, we made the determination we're going to hold tight with the 10-day. At one point, we were 14 days. Now we're down to 10. It's a risk factor, and I'm responsible for that. So if I feel comfortable at the advice given by the medical professionals that I think we can knock it down to 5, and it's very similar. We've dealt with flu outbreaks many times through the years. If I think we can handle it, but as I said, I'm responsible. I'm cautiously approaching it. If I could get rid of the mask and the CDC guidelines tomorrow, I would do so, but I'm doing the very best I can to make sure we're protecting our. We may be having a different conversation, Mr. Co-Chair, if it went south on me, so. I know.
Okay. Any other questions for Director Shannon? Director Shannon, thank you for your time today, and thank you for your service and your men and women of your department. Tough job.
I'm very proud to work for them.
Y'all do it well, and these aren't new problems, but they're obviously getting worse. So.
Mr. Chairman, we shifted their entire standard budget to ARP funds for the duration of the biennium. Now, what policy decisions that you make with the ARPA funds and what's available for 25, 26, the length of ARPA is going to be the deciding factor, how long you can go.
So.
Payment?
Mr. Chairman, I believe this would be ARPA Direct. And we'd also use it to help us with the revenue assistance.
Which brings up that question. I mean, if you do it, should they be general funds, and then with that, you can just pick whichever one works the best?
The key to it would be is, do you intend to have it go into 25, 26 as a general fund standard? There's a question there.
Okay. So if we did, then you'd use that language that it's ARPA for this biennium and general funds for the next.
That would be correct if your intent is to put it in the standard.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on that, the technology system that the department's withdrawing the proposal, any way to slide that into ARPA Direct?
Mr. Chairman, I think that would be a stretch.
Well, we like stretching.
There's another state that tried to do a complete computer system, but that was CARES Act money, but they did that and they got slapped pretty hard. They ended up having to cough it all up. So it's not without, there are limits. Anything else? Anything else? All right. Thank you very much, Director. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
For
Mr.
your team and your time today. So Dawn, for tomorrow, any changes to the schedule for tomorrow, Dawn?
There are no changes. I believe the posted agenda is correct. You have the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources, your last agency for their initial appearance for the 23-24 biennial budget, followed by a callback of the Department of Administration and Information. You have a total of 5 bills that are currently scheduled for tomorrow. I read through those yesterday, happy to do so again. The most challenging of those is probably the discussion relative to local government distributions. And you also have a couple of additional callbacks, specifically the Department of Administration and Information and the Department of Education and the Attorney General's Office.
Okay, so do we have the lists of items that we want to talk to each of the callbacks about? Do we have those?
Yes, you do, or at least they have been advised. Certainly you can ask any questions
Sure.
that you wish. On the Department of Administration and Information, you had asked them to come back, particularly with respect to their risk management budget. You'll recall they have reduced that by about $15 to $20 million over the last 3 years or so. You also asked for some additional information on their compensation program. And I think when you initially made the request to call them back, you also included HR consolidation. Now that you've heard how that has worked with the various different agencies, if you had any feedback relative to that. For the Department of Education, the two primary purposes you called them back for are their waiver with the federal government. They indicated in December that they were preparing their waiver for maintenance of equity as well as maintenance of effort for the ESSER 1, 2, and 3 funds. I don't know what the status is on that, but I think they'll be prepared to visit about it. And then the Attorney General's Office, I think there are at least 3 topics. There's the issue with the firing ranges up at the post facility in Douglas. Questions about their position on capital cases. And then finally, the item that was discussed earlier today with the Wyoming Business Council, and that is the follow-up on the businesses that received CARES Act funding and according to our external auditor were in violation, and what the AG's position might be on recouping those funds.
Okay. Thank you. Don, anything else on your mind that we dropped the ball on and we've forgotten about that we need to want to make sure we're aware of going into tomorrow?
Mr. Chairman, I do not. Let me, if I might, just give a short preview of Friday as well.
Sure.
Friday morning, Kevin and I, as co-chairs to the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, will release the new January forecast. We do have some time. Actually, Karen is in the process of updating this agenda for additional bill drafts. I believe the bill drafts will include Senate File 118, Governor's authorization to expend ARP Act funds, employee group health insurance decreases, also known as rate holidays, and the authority to issue those. The investment of Game and Fish Commission operating funds in Pool A. And then later that day in the afternoon, there is a piece of legislation. I don't know the title, but it is being printed right now relative to the Board of Psychology and the accreditation of a master's employees with master's degree working in institutions. The governor is also, well, before the governor, the geologic survey has been asked to return to JAC at 1 p.m. on Friday. And the topic there, I believe, is also a topic of a potential governor's letter. And it relates to a federal opportunity or a federal grant in the rare earths area that may require some matching funds or state support. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, at toward the end of the day at 2:30 p.m., Buck McVeigh, the Chief of Staff to Governor Gordon, as well as several staff from the governor's office, will appear to walk through all of the governor's letters at that time. Finally, at the end, very end of the day, some representatives from the courts will appear, and they have a court's letter, and I believe that has been circulated to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Co-Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. Vice Chair.
that the court's letter has been circulated by email, or is it in the agency handouts?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's definitely on SharePoint. I believe it was emailed out last night, and it will be circulated in hard copy on Friday morning. It is found in the agency budgets under governor's or executive letters.
Okay,
So Don, this is different than their other requests, something new.
It is something new, yes.
What is it?
I think there's about 7 or 8 projects totaling around $8 million. And they're in 2 groups. A group of, I think, roughly 4 relate directly to the courts. And then there are 2 others that relate more to the, I think it's equal justice program.
Is it ARPA related or?
Yes, all of them are ARPA related. However, a portion of them are direct ARPA dollars, and they indicate so, but you have to read it closely. And a portion of them are requests for conserved general funds.
And Kevin, Donna, we looked at and determined which may or may not qualify.
Mr. Chairman, I can get that list and hand it off.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the governor's letters, Don. The governor's letters on Friday, would that be all governor's letters intended to be proposed, or would there be an opportunity for him to submit more next week prior to markup?
It's
Or
all until we get some more.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the intent would be to have all the governor's letter with the understanding that we are going to be working ARPA as we get better understandings of what qualifies for direct versus non-direct.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else? Anything else, members?
So, Mr. Co-Chair, Kevin, it's, as we walk through the entire budget, any requests or even non-requests, have you done an analysis of anything else that we could use the direct dollars for? Or is it, and then the next question off of that is that something that we should do, or between now and whenever we got time to do it?
Mr. Chairman, yes. And it's one of those deals where you have so many balls in the air that you can't finish all the projects. But we do have a start where we have interviewed the agencies for ARPA permissible. And that list, I'll resurrect where we are on that, see if I can't hand that off to LSO, because that was the intent originally, is to use that list to go into greater extent for the conversion to revenue assistance. So I'll see if I can't get that kick-started. And then that would be helpful, because the intent all along was just to get as much as that completed as we have. Now we just received an additional 82 million. And then that would increase that contingency plan to be able to use White House FMR so we can get there, right? But we'd much rather have this all done through the budget like we did with the corrections of the Department of Health, if we can find those permissible areas. So I'll resurrect that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay.